Lesson 7 has to do with more on algebraic addition, and basically this will just be a little more challenging, a little more advanced than the previous lessons. 7a is about the concept of opposite numbers, and a good way to understand what opposite numbers are is to work with a number line. And so let's just go ahead and make a number line. You need to be making one too. Doesn't have to be exactly like mine, but pretty similar. And let's just think about positive 2. Let's plot positive 2 on that number line. And so what we would do is we would go to the right 2. And that would give us positive 2. And so let's just, underneath that, let's write positive 2 and put that in parentheses. Now, the opposite of positive 2, we could put a negative sign in front of that to represent the opposite of positive 2. And that's what we mean by opposites. The opposite of positive 2 would be negative 2, and so we would just start at 0 and go to the left, negative 2. So that would represent negative 2, or the opposite of positive 2. So to the right we have represented positive 2, to the left we've represented the opposite of positive 2. Now think about this. What would the opposite of positive 2 be? Well, again, let's just draw on the number line. We can think of positive 2, we'd go to the right to get positive 2. The opposite of that would be negative 2, and the opposite of that would get us back to positive 2. So the opposite of 2 would equal 2. So if you understand this, you would see that we could put another negative sign out here, and that would get us back to negative 2. Maybe you recognize the pattern here. The opposite of 2, that's going to always be positive. And then if we had 1, 2, 3, 4 negative signs, that would also be a positive 2. Basically, if you have an odd number of negative signs multiplied by a number, that makes it positive. If you have, or it makes it negative. If you have an even number of negative signs in front of a number, that makes it positive. And so, for example, on the left there, the opposite of positive 2, that would just simplify to negative 2. That's the same thing, because you have 3 negative signs or opposite signs there. This is just another way to think about the negative sign. It means the opposite of the positive value for that particular numeral. So now that you understand these opposites, let's look at practice problem A, and let's do that. Let's add algebraically to do that problem. Now this is a little more complex than some of the ones we've been doing, just because we have so many negative signs. So what we could do here to simplify this problem is to group those negative signs together with the numeral that they're in front of. For example, negative times negative 2, we could just group that together, and then negative times negative 6, group that together. And you may even want to use like a different colored pencil, just like I'm doing on the board here, to help you visualize and differentiate these problems. Put a plus sign in between those two groups, because we always add algebraically. Now, what you can do from what you learned in Part A is to simplify negative times negative 2, or the opposite of 2. You have an even number of negatives, so you know that answer will just be 2. Plus 6, because you have negative times negative 6. And so that is equal to 8. And we could put a positive sign in front of that as well. So what we did there to simplify that problem was we grouped those opposites or negative signs together, and then we put plus signs in between the different groupings, because we always add algebraically. And circling them in red, that helped us to distinguish between the different groups and their negative signs. Let's look at another one. Plus a negative 3 minus a minus of positive 5. So again, let's just break this into groups with all of the signs. This time we have plus and minus signs included, so all the signs that are in front of the digits, let's just group those together. Okay, so we see we have two groups there. Put a plus sign in between them, and let's just work on them one at a time. And so simplify plus a negative 3, or positive times negative 3. That would just be a negative 3. And then on the right there we have two negatives, so those would cancel each other, and we'd have a positive 5. So put plus a positive 5. And now we can just simplify that and take the difference. We'd have 2, and the answer would be positive 2. Look at this problem. Now, one thing that happens on these problems is that they're just such basic addition and subtraction that you might take them for granted, and you end up making careless mistakes on them, and they end up being really difficult. So it's a really good idea to do just like I'm doing here, and put these numbers and their signs into groups. And do that first. Just group everything and the sign in front of it, just like I'm doing here. Even that positive 7, and then all of that. Every digit and the signs in front of it, just group that, and then when you get to the next sign and those numbers, group that, and put plus signs in between them. Now some of these you'll have to simplify what's inside that group. Other ones you don't have to do anything to them. But this is just a good idea to do this. Now we have the opposite of positive 6, so that would just be negative 6, and then a plus sign. The opposite of 3, or negative times negative, that would just be a positive 3. And then plus a negative 4. And then plus a positive 7. And then plus a negative 6. Because we have 3 negatives there. Negative times negative times negative. That's a positive. An odd number, that's a negative. An odd number of negatives always yields a negative result. Okay, now we can go ahead and add in pairs. Negative 6 plus a positive 3 would be negative 3. I'm not going to be talking about all the absolute value and all those rules anymore, because I'm hoping that you understand how I got negative 3 for that answer. And then the next pair is a negative 4 and a positive 7. That would be a positive 3. And then plus a negative 6 on the end there still. Add these pairs together. Negative 3 plus a positive 3 would be 0, plus a negative 6 would just be negative 6 for an answer. Let's do one more practice problem. And again, let's group our numbers and signs together. So we have a negative 1 there with a negative in front of it. We'll group that. Then make this a group and this a group. Put plus signs in between each group, and we'll simplify those groups. Again, I hope you can see how this makes it easier to see what to do by doing these groups, and even if you want to, use a different color pen or pencil to do that. Now, negative times negative, that would be a positive 1 for the first group. Then a plus sign. Then we have 3 negatives there, an odd number of them. That means our answer is negative. And we don't worry about brackets or parentheses or just whatever it is. It still means negative times negative times negative. And then the last one will be a negative 11 plus a negative 11. Okay, simplify by adding in pairs. We'll have plus 1 and a minus 5. That would give us a negative 4 plus a negative 11. And so our answer is a negative 15. So do what you need to get through these problems. They're not that hard. It's just keeping up with your negative and positive signs is what makes them difficult. I give you some examples and some tips here on how to work these problems, but you've got to figure out for yourself the best way for you to get organized and to make the problem and do the problem as efficiently as you can. If you need to put a number line on there as well, then put a number line on there. If you need to use different colored pens and pencils like I'm doing, then do that to help you. Okay, well that's all for lesson 7.